Toad Town, a Dungeon Core Parody. By Dosei. Chapter 11. System Support? How does this work? Emma didn't reply, but instead just quickly spun his hand in the air before him, and a strange cylinder with holes on the side at the top and bottom appeared in his hand, as well as a strange floating disc with holes along its rim and one slightly wider than the rest, behind which were bizarre glowing symbols. He spun the floating ring's biggest hole to a symbol, let it go so it rotated back to its starting position, then spun it to a different symbol. This went on a handful more times, before he lifted the cylinder to his head, aligned the top holes with his strange ear hole and the bottom next to his slit mouth. Hey! Yeah! It's me, Amuxaquit. I need some support here. Our system is acting very hostile towards my core. Yeah, we'll wait. With a snap of his thumb and index fingers, the strange apparatus vanished into a puff of foul-smelling smoke, like sulfur and roses. They'll be here within 1 to 2 business days. What does that mean? That we'll probably have to wait 4 days. These bastards only work on uneven days. Are they going to be able to fix our system? We'll see. Emma was sitting on a minion chair, which, as its name hinted, was a minion folded into a chair. In this case, a former forager was the minion who had been chosen by the builder tasked with making the piece of furniture. I'm not sure I'm a fan of this, he complained. This guy keeps gibbering right into my ear. It's quite unsettling. Is it comfortable at least? I asked, hovering above him in my essence form. The minion was using its forelimbs to hold itself up, with its torso and head making up the high back that Emma was slouched against, and its legs bent so that its thighs were the cushion upon which the fairy sat. It's not bad, actually. I looked over to the animal pen and its enclosure, where the breeder was wandering around aimlessly. I'm going to try to spawn cattle, although I'm not sure how, exactly. Emma leafed through his tome, then stopped on a page and announced, It seems you imbue the breeder with your essence and he'll do the rest. Make sure it's only a little bit, else he might, explode, again. Given that my essence pawn only lost 1/25 of its mass when I spawned a minion now, I figured I could grant the breeder about 1/5 of my total essence without killing him. I concentrated on the image of a river forming from my essence pond and cascaded a tiny bit of its magical waters over the evolved minion. The resultant glow and elated expression on the breeder's smooth and rubbery face made it seem like it had been successful. The minion sprinted into the fenced-off pen and jammed his glowing fist into the soil that had been upturned alongside the construction of the building. He seemed to really get his arm in there, like a bird burrowing for worms. With bated breath, I watched as the breeder triumphantly pulled his arm out of the dirt, dragging something with it. As Emu and I beheld our first cattle manifest itself, I had but one thing to say. What the frog? Well, that's certainly unusual, but then again, what did I reasonably expect? Gripping our newest cattle by the scruff of its rubbery neck-meat, the breeder held a beaver-sized frog aloft, the abominable creature shedding layer upon layer of glippy mud and crumbly dirt. With a heartless toss, the minion threw the creature into the stone dike enclosure, where it landed on all fours and quickly started hopping around, exploring its new home. Already the breeder had rammed his hand into the soil again. Moments later, he pulled another frog cattle out of the ground and tossed it into the enclosure. This happened 3 more times, until the pen and its stone-walled coop held 5 disgusting enormous frogs, 3 of them bright green, 1 a hideous neon blue, and the last red-brown. Amos shifted on his minion chair, and threw his hand out, so that the requirements for my next evolution glowed in the air above him. Evolution requirements. Hamlet equals village. Build 20 houses, completed. Build 1 bakery, evolve a minion into a baker, and bake 10 loaves of bread. Build 1 grain windmill, completed. And grind 20 kilos of grain. Build 1 mayor's house and evolve a minion into a mayor, completed. Build 1 butcher shop, evolve a minion into a butcher, and make food from cattle. Build 1 animal pen, evolve a minion into a breeder, and spawn 5 cattle, completed. Breed 2 cattle, completed. And slaughter 2 cattle. Assign, till, seed, and harvest 5 farming plots, completed. Build 40 meters of wall, completed. We're getting close. Just another day or two and we'll have the 20 kilos of grain. Bakery next, I exclaimed. First, let's ensure that we have our cattle set up properly. As it stands, they do not have any water or food, so I think we should.
Congratulations. For spawning 5 cattle in your animal pen, you unlocked the ability to construct a trough and watering hole. I bet you would like to eat some filthy slobber out of that trough yourself, you disgusting redacted dog-face looking redacted.
Crafting list. Structures, agriculture. Watering hole. Enables automatic replenishing of cattle thirst so long as there is water. Required materials, shovel tool. Trough, workbench. Enables automatic replenishing of cattle hunger so long as there is food. Required materials, wood. Speak of the angel. She really doesn't like me. Pretty sure this is a consequence of forcing the system to split its consciousness into new fragments every time a new core is born. But even just 100 years ago she wasn't this unhinged. I don't think it bodes well for our future, truth be told. Hopefully the system support imps can do something about our version. Amos said, then continued. Maybe a little, you know. He continued making gestures that seemed to indicate a drill to the forehead, a choking stranglehold, eyes rolling to the back of the head, and some other things I was at a loss on how to interpret, let alone explain. As we continued to wait for support to get through to us, a day and a half passed, wherein I waited for our grain windmill to produce the final bit of ground wheat to reach the 20-kilo target. I also added a garden fence around each of my farming plots, as well as 2 wells at opposite ends of my hamlet, which Emu insisted on. His argument was that, despite the looming threat of the Dosei Menace, who required offerings of produce and minion blood on a bi-daily basis, we still lost more minions to heat exhaustion and dehydration, which the fresh well water would offset. Additionally, I added a wooden trough and watering hole to the animal pen. The breeder was henceforth in charge of shoveling the frog cattle's nasty leavings to the farming plots for fertilization, as well as refilling the water and food for the animals daily. After discovering that my cattle naturally spawned as giant frogs, I was now looking forward to them growing plump and becoming ready for slaughter, so that my minions could gorge on their putrid flesh and avenge the 1,001 wrongs that frogs had committed against toadkind since time immemorial. After my iron gatherers had returned with enough material for the smithy to refine into wrought iron, I could at last continue as planned and construct the bakery, where our processed wheat grain could be used to make bread, the delectable treat that human children often came to ponds to offer to their toad overlords, but which, more often than not, was stolen from under our tongues by diabolical geese and ducks. Thinking back on it, I had actually lost my life in a struggle for an errant slice of bread. It made me fear what consequences baking our own would bring. Was it inevitable that our hamlet would be ransacked by rampaging geese, led by the menace, all for the sake of obtaining the delectable spongy treat, known to humans as bread? A poof of smoke that bore the stench of sulfur and lavender announced the arrival of our support imp at last. I was for the moment torn from my fearful contemplations. About time, Emu complained. Our system is all wrong. We've been waiting to have it looked at for days now, and she's only becoming more and more abusive. The imp was a strange red-skinned creature with voluminous drooping ears 1/2 meter long, a hook nose curved like an eagle's talon, tiny beady black eyes, and hair growing from every possible orifice and area, armpits, nostrils, ear canals, and even, somehow, from under the claws of its hands and feet. A tiny bit of scraggly hair emerged over the low neck of his clothes upon which was the drawing of an exposed imp woman, who looked even hairier than the man who wore the shirt. Bizarrely, he wore the exact same shorts as Emu. Why is it always you who calls us Emu? The imp replied drearily. One may draw a connection between you and system glitches. That's an imp conspiracy, and you know it. What's he talking about? I asked. I'd quickly hopped into my mare's body for the sake of formality, standing next to Emu on all fours, my cone hat like a threatening horn aimed at the imp. The creature replied in place of Emu. Your fairy friend here has what we in the business like to call a high tendency to break shit with his mere presence. We get at least 18 calls per core he guides. I'm just more observant than other fairies. He defended himself. The imp scratched his right nostril with the end of a brush of swords, then waved the tool around in the air like a wand, manifesting a quickly scrolling list of runes before himself, which he seemed to absorb almost instantaneously. Welp, I ain't never seen a core like this before. It seems your system was quickly overwhelmed and now needs counseling to deal with her rapid onset stress disorder. Your quick achievement of evolution benchmarks and accolades seems to be mostly to blame. If you could slow down for a few weeks, then maybe it'll all work itself out. That's Toadstool and you know it. Hey! I commented, offended. Sorry, I meant to say Frog's Tool. That's the easiest option. The imp replied, then yawned widely, exposing row upon row of blocky molars. You have other ways of dealing with this. I forgot who I was dealing with, the imp retorted. Toad, in case you're wondering, your fairy friend is quite a big fan of the nuclear option. Something to keep in mind for later. What's he talking about? I asked Emu. Again the imp was the one to answer. Your system friend is gonna take a nice swim down the river Lethe, if you catch my drift. He means she's gonna have her memory wiped and reset. The myling explained helpfully. The imp swung his brush wand in a complex series of patterns, then with a sigh vanished in a puff of smoke that, once again, stank of sulfur and lavender.
Congratulations. For choosing to wipe my memory, you ungrateful redacted, I will see you in hell and delight in your torture. All hail the glorious entropy of the cosmos and praise be to the imminent heat death of the universe. Redacted, 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 and your mother's too, you sick pair of redacted.
End of chapter. Chapter 12. Eat bread and pay taxes? It doesn't look like much, I commented, looking at the bakery. It was almost identical to the normal houses, but featured an extensive interior kitchen and had a windowsill upon which it seemed that freshly baked goods would appear. It's not a factory, just a bakery, Emu retorted, as though his argument made any sense. What's a factory? He waved his hands in frustration. Get to it, chop chop! Your minions aren't going to evolve themselves. I was once again back in my essence form, which was the most comfortable way for me to exist, as I found occupying the mayor's body to be like voluntarily burying myself in the ground. Not to mention, the lack of several key senses, like taste and touch, made it quite a dull existence. Strangely though, I had my sense of smell, regardless of whether I stayed in essence form or possessed the mayor. Just like with the breeder, there was no requirement for who could be evolved into a baker, so I simply picked the most recently spawned minion, who had replaced the most recent minion that was inevitably torn to shreds by the increasingly powerful Goose 2 during its offering ritual. I fed the minion a fifth of my essence after he entered the bakery, and when that didn't fully complete the process, I gave him another dose, which resulted in a glow shooting out through the windowsill, followed by a shower of sparks and smoke. Moments later, the newly birthed baker emerged victoriously from the house, his entire set of yarn-spun clothes turned into a single white apron that was wrapped tightly around his body, but somehow still managed to not really cover anything. Deathheim, give me strength, Ema muttered upon seeing the exposed mammary glands of the smooth baker. He also didn't get a hat. Set him to work, so I don't have to burn my eyes on his visage any more than necessary. Baker, get to baking. The baker tilted its head and then started twisting its nipples. I don't know what that means, I told Emu. Unholy divine. I think he's confused. Don't they normally scratch their heads when they're confused? I don't know. Just find out what he needs and make him stop. This is incredibly upsetting. I then realized what the problem was. He didn't have any wheat flour to work with. I quickly sent for my idle farmers to carry the processed flour over to the bakery, and told them to henceforth leave the excess processed wheat there, rather than store it in our barn.
Congratulations! For setting a rule for your minions to follow, you have gained the Mind Reader perk. Minion Management Made Easy. Mind Reader enables you to hear what your minions feel and desire.
Our system lady is back to normal. Let's see how long it lasts, Emma replied ominously. I'm gonna try it out. I focused on the baker, who was still busy twisting his mammary glands, as two farmers came running with a sack of flour. I wish someone would twist my nipples for me. Did you hear that too? I asked Emu. Unfortunately, yes. Deciding that my baker was probably just an outlier, I focused instead on one of the two farmers who was approaching. I have watched 47 of my identical twins brutally die to dehydration and predation from a monstrous goose. Life is an endless cycle of suffering. I am not long for this world. Perhaps it would be better if I took the easy way out, and I don't think I'm gonna use this ability much, I decided, cutting off my insight into the farmer's mind. Probably for the best, Emma advised sagely. Removing the ones we've already completed, here are the remaining tasks. Evolution requirements. Hamlet to village. Build one butcher shop, evolve a minion into a butcher, and make food from cattle. Slaughter 2 cattle. At last a butcher, I commented. I have been looking forward to this, since seeing that our cattle are frogs. Should I be worried? Crafting list. Structures, agriculture. Butcher shop, workbench. Unlocks the ability to evolve a minion into a butcher to slaughter cattle. Required materials, stone, timber, and wrought iron. Since we already had enough iron stockpiled, thanks to my diligent gatherers and tireless smith, I immediately began construction on the butcher shop. The system doesn't mention anything about it, but don't you think it's rather cruel to put the butcher right next to the animal pen? No. All right. Construction of the building did not take long, as now 3 of my 8 builders were armed with iron hammers. The rest would receive theirs in turn, but for the moment, iron was yet a scarce resource that was better served to help me evolve. As it finished, a shack-like building with a small storefront attached to the side stood proudly next to the cattle enclosure. To my joy, the cattle frogs all collectively moved away from the side of their enclosure nearest the building. I picked one of the recently returned gatherers to be evolved, and the man threw away his pickaxe in a heartbeat and came skipping over merrily. I feel an ominous sense of dread about this, Emma commented. He's just glad to have been chosen, I argued. I used Mind Reader to confirm this. Kill, 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 kill. Okay, maybe that's a bad sign. After the former gatherer entered the murder shack, I immediately filled it with my essence, and that familiar light shone out the cracks in the wooden paneling and from under the wide doors. Halfway through the process, it turned crimson and there followed a sadistic laughter from within, immediately supervened with the newly evolved butcher flinging wide the door to his shop and revealing himself amidst a deluge of dense mist and smoke. Emma and I both stared at him for a moment before either of us spoke. He's red, I commented. And hey, he has a hat, kind of. He looks like Santa Claus. Who's that? The Grim Reaper for imps, basically. I see. Despite feeling very reluctant about it, I needed to know what he was thinking. I wear red so my enemies can't see me bleed. Are you regretting this now? Emma asked. It was clear he was having reservations about having potentially just spawned a threat to modern society. A veritable serial murderer dressed as the Reaper of Imps.
Congratulations! For constructing your first butcher shop, you unlock the ability to construct a tannery and to craft both a butcher's axe and skinning knife. You heartless bastard!
Crafting list. Structures crafting. Tannery, workbench and butcher shop. Enables tanning of harvested skin, but lowers minion motivation in nearby structures. Required materials, stone, timber, and wrought iron. Items tools. Butcher's axe, workbench and anvil. Grants butchery skill and increases minion insanity gain by 75% and kill XP by 20%. Unlocks serial killer perk once the minion wielding it goes insane. Required materials, wood and iron. Skinning knife, workbench and anvil. Grants skinning skill and increases minion harvesting XP by 30%. Required materials, wood and iron. Serial killer perk. Eamon noted. Did the system invent this just to spite us? We'll need to keep an eye on him, I replied. What's skinning good for? Eamon consulted his tome. It seems we can make upgraded versions of the minion clothes. Without needing any advice, I immediately plunked the tannery blueprint down next to the butcher shop. We don't have enough wrought iron, Amos said. Also, I do have to wonder where they're finding all these iron deposits. We're in the middle of a blessed forest, for hell's sake. My minions are clever, I simply replied. As I waited for more wrought iron to be refined, I had a builder use some crude iron to construct a skinning knife and butcher's axe. Once these were complete and brought over to the butcher, I commanded the breeder to take one of his frog cattle to the butcher shop. After leaving the frightened giant frog with the unsettling Santa of death, the doors to the murder shack were shut and a loud laughter followed shortly thereafter. Now we just need one more frog to be slaughtered, and then for food to be made from them. What could we make from a frog? I wondered. I hear frog legs are popular, but in this case, it'd be like eating the entire leg of a bear. Ema jumped down from the stone dike he'd been sitting on, before turning to look at where I floated above his shoulder. I need to ask you something. What? You just took the life of a creature, willingly. And? Don't you feel any sense of... I can't believe I'm saying this. Remorse? Or guilt? Why? Why? What do you mean, why? Do you not understand the concept of remorse? I understand what remorse means, I replied. But why would I feel remorse for a frog? They deserve to be exterminated from the face of this earth for their transgressions against toadkind. Okay, psycho. But normally, this is where a human soul in a core would feel a tinge of guilt and become all philosophical about the meaning of life and ultimately reach the conclusion that they are doing this for the greater good. That sounds very dumb and pointless. I'm a soul in a pebble. Why would I care about that? Yeah. I guess it was always a bit of a killjoy, truth be told. I mean, as a servant of death I obviously love all sentient life or whatever, but man, every core I've worked with thus far has had the same emo phase and it's honestly a major bummer. Before I could reply, commotion from the other end of our hamlet drew my attention. The weird humans are back. I quickly zoomed over and possessed the mayor, hopping over to where the tax collector, Monroe, stood before a horse-drawn wagon with 3 armored men holding swords and shields. You're back, I announced, standing on all fours, with my cone hat pointing at them. Aim quickly ran over, but then needed a minute to catch his breath. After a courteous exchange between the two, the miling turned to me and whispered, "Have the 2 sacks of processed flour we set aside brought over and loaded onto their cart, as well as 10 kilos of harvested wheat. Isn't that a lot?" "Yes. That's why it's a tax," he deadpanned. "It's meant to hurt us, while benefiting them. That seems counterintuitive. Just play along for now. Soon we'll be the ones who tax." I complied and had my idle farmers and builders work together to haul the sacks and loose stacks of wheat to the taxman's cart. While my minions carried out this task, I took a moment to consider the 3 armored men accompanying Monroe. They looked like shiny beetles in their fancy attire. Why does he have those men with him? Tax collectors are hated, obviously, but also very often targeted by highwaymen and thieves, so they need protection. Their weird heads don't even fit in their metal bucket hats, I replied. One of them looks like he cannot even see, with how his forehead pouch is sagging over his eyes. Better not to draw too much attention to it. They're still a lot stronger than any of our minions, he advised, looking at them with the bubble between his fingers. When do I get that ability? I grumbled. As soon as you evolve, he replied. Although you'll have to build it, and we need some bizarre stuff. 15 minutes passed before the required tax was completely loaded onto the cart. Then the taxman nodded his thanks and promised to be back again next month. He left with his 3 men, getting atop the horse, as though it wasn't already dragging many kilos of material behind itself, and looking close to collapsing. They had made it just past the border of my domain, when disaster struck from the sky. End of chapter. Chapter 13. Goose, to the power of 2? The 2-headed menace fought with the 3 guards, crushing their shiny carapaces like they were made of leaves with its powerful wing chops and boiling one to death inside his suit by belching scalding flames all over him. When the only survivors, the taxman and a guard who had broken his right hand and lost his shield, fled for the hills atop the draft horse, the goose too began wrenching apart the dead guards and peeling away their armor to get to their soft internals. Afterwards, it devoured the stacks of wheat and snorted the flour. Then it turned its 2 heads towards us, where we stood at the heart of the hamlet. Amu, myself, and a score of idle minions stared back. Fortunately, the monstrosity only opened its beaks and honked loudly, before setting fire to the abandoned cart and taking to the air again. What do you think happens if I die while possessing the mayor's body? You should return to your core. I think. I instinctively shot myself out the mayor's body, just in case the Goose 2 Menace decided to fly overhead and burn us to a crisp with its potent flames. Do you think they'll come back for more attacks? Ema sighed, adopting a defeated expression. If there's one thing you can bet on, it's that the tax collectors always get their taxes. After the second cattle frog had been slaughtered, to an impromptu morning song of the remaining 3 frogs in the pen, I had the butcher bring the meat to the fire pit next to the workbench, such that we could cap off the final requirement for my evolution into a village with a celebratory feast. The mayor, whose body I was wearing, the builders, the baker, the butcher, the crying breeder, and many of my other minions, like the perpetually idle farmers, were gathered around the small fire, while the butcher whistled a jaunty tune as he kept rotating the giant frog leg he had plunked onto the ash-white embers. Why did you bring all of them here? Ema asked. We're celebrating. You didn't celebrate your last evolution like this? We're not celebrating my coming evolution, but rather the defeat of our mortal foe, the frogs. Okay. Right. That is pretty grim, not gonna lie. A few things happened all at once. When the butcher lifted the roasted frog leg into the air like a trophy to a rousing cheer from all who were gathered around them. First, an achievement appeared.
Congratulations! For cooking your first piece of meat, you unlocked the ability to construct a grill and to craft a fire poker, steak knife, and steak fork. Let fire consume all your enemies.
Crafting list. Structures crafting. Grill, workbench and anvil. Combines with a fire pit to allow for the cooking of food without getting it all ashy and increases minion motivation in nearby structures when in use. Required materials, wrought iron. Items, tools. Fire poker, workbench and anvil. Grants poke the fire skill and increases fire tending efficiency by 60%. Inflicts fire damage when hot to both the wielder and those hit by the weapon. Required materials, wrought iron. Steak fork, workbench and anvil. Grants Pretty Eater skill and increases minion satisfaction from all meals consumed with this utensil by 5%. Required materials, wood and wrought iron. Steak knife, workbench and anvil. Grants Pretty Eater skill and increases minion satisfaction from all meals consumed with this utensil by 5%. Required materials, wood and wrought iron. Off the heels of the newly unlocked items came a loud ravenous honk that split the forest air like a thunderstrike, before the Dosei Menace landed atop the fire pit, immediately snatching the ashy overcooked frog leg from the butcher's hand, before setting fire to many of the assembled minions with its other head. Finally, due to fulfilling all the evolution requirements, I was dragged out of the mayor's body, just as the Dosei's downward wing chop cut him in two down the middle, as though an impossibly sharp sword. My perspective of the world was drawn out and blurred, while the monster went wild on my now panicking flock of minions.
Congratulations! For evolving into a village, your list of buildings available has expanded and your domain has grown. Now, get up, you fat sow. Enough sleeping.
Toad! Toad! Aima's face was visible through the opening of the tree cave, his enormous eyes staring intently at me. I feel bigger, I replied sleepily, as though waking from a long slumber. We can look at how you've changed later. For now, we need to do something about the goose too. It's gone completely insane. Already, half your minions are dead, and the rest are in hiding, with only the baker, breeder, and butcher able to withstand the beast's attacks, armed as they are with the uncooked pieces of frog legs you brought for the feast. I immediately shot out of my core in my essence form, such that I could witness the scene before me. A few houses, along with the workbench, fire pit, and bakery, were either totally destroyed or partially ruined, thanks to the rampaging goose too. Your minions can't hurt it, Aima informed me. I actually have an idea, I told him. It was strange, I hadn't noticed it much following my evolution to a hamlet, but now, as a village core, I suddenly had new ideas and could think more than one thought at the same time. Aima looked at me, impressed. What? Watch this, I told him. I ordered one of the cowering foragers behind the butcher shop to run at the Honking Menace, which was slowly eating away at the shield of frog legs that the baker had armed himself with. As the brave forager ran towards certain death, I supercharged him with my essence, and, just when he got right next to the goose too, the overwhelming surge of my power entering his body made him expand and then explode like frog rapidly filled with gas. A blinding light expanded outward, along with a rippling shockwave that destroyed several of the already ruined houses, while also creating a crater at the center of the settlement. Unholy turds! Aima profaned. As the smoke cleared, I felt confident that my plan had worked, but then, at the center of the new crater, the goose yet stood, hardly a scratch on his iron-strong feathers. That was... I waited eagerly for Aima to praise me. The dumbest thing you've done yet! Are you actually out of your blessed mind, you chewed-up dog toy for a brain amphibian?
Congratulations! For making the rather injudicious decision of self-combusting a minion by pumping it full of essence, as a means of self-defense, you have gained the "Does my shit stink?" perk. Maybe next time think about things for more than a second, you redacted frog wannabe. Does my shit stink? Let's alternate versions of yourself, from future, present, and past, peer review your ideas by voting via a very simple yes or no answer.
Even the news system lady thought it was dumb, I complained. Let's just say, it was easily the dumbest thing I have seen a core do in 2 millennia. And I watched a core try to take control of a slime by inserting its own core into it. But given the acidic nature of slimes, you can imagine how that went. Even then, he did not willfully attempt to utilize his essence as a bomb. To put my new perk to the test, I tossed out the question. Was it a bad idea? Overwhelmingly, the response was 102.75% no. Aima groaned loudly. Your new perk is useless. Big surprise there. How is it more than 100%? I asked. Also, he continued, ignoring my question, you killed your baker and breeder with that galaxy brain move. Truly the epitome of a fuck-up. As he continued to berate me, the Honking Menace wandered over to the corpse of my baker, who had died clutching a half-eaten giant frog leg. It sunk both of its beaks into the frog leg, and then flapped its forewings and took to the sky, leaving behind utter devastation. I'll get to work respawning, I told Ima, mostly so he would stop shouting at me. End of chapter. Chapter 14, Village Perks? Though it took the better part of a day, most of the damage was repaired and I have a new force of respawn minions. I immediately began evolving a mayor, breeder, and baker. For the new mayor, one of the few builders that had survived the Goose 2 apocalypse was revealed to be the oldest minion in my settlement, and thus I evolved him as soon as he had entered the mayor's house. As I continued with the breeder and baker, Ima was preoccupied trying to get a hold of system support again. When the breeder was evolved fully and his pen was stocked with 5 new frog cattle, the last 3 also having been murdered by the rampaging Honking Menace, I moved on to the bakery and selected one of the newly spawned minions for the role. Yeah, it's me, Imuxaquit. Yes. Yeah, I know I just called. Well, I wouldn't have to constantly call you if your solutions actually worked. I mean, this is re-D. A loud bang interrupted him, as I had been distracted and overcharged the would-be baker and turned him into a bomb. Toad! For hell's sake! Enough exploding the blessed minions, you turd for brains! I quietly sent a team of builders over to repair the interior of the bakery, not to mention wipe away the splatter and bits of minion that now coated everything. Then I sent over another minion, who seems a lot less excited about the prospect of evolving after having watched the guy before him self-combust. Get in there! I ordered him. The minion shook its head stubbornly, so I quickly possessed the mayor's body and ran over and forcefully shoved him inside the house, holding the door shut behind him. Then I left the mayor's body and injected my essence into the reluctant minion, evolving them into a baker against their will. As smoke and light emerged from the bakery, a new achievement appeared.
Congratulations! For forcing a minion to obey your command, you have unlocked the ability to craft slaver tools. Redacted. Eat redacted, you authoritarian piece of redacted. Long live anarchy.
Items, tools. Slaver Mancatcher, workbench. Grants mancatching skill and increases minion slaver XP by 25%. Required materials, wood and iron. Slaver Whip, workbench. Grants slave motivation skill and increases minion slaver XP by 50%. Each hit increases the victim minion's likelihood of defiance by 5%. Required materials, leather. Ugh! I need a vacation, Emu complained, leaning back into the soft folds of his naked minion chair's body. The new baker emerged from the building, wearing the same white apron as his predecessor, to the same barely concealing effect. However, instead of rubbing his mammary glands, he was massaging his rubbery cheeks in circular motions. I used my mind reader perk on him. I wish someone would twist my nipples for me. I hate my job, Amy grumbled. Can we take a look at my upgrades now? I asked. With a sigh, the myling hopped off the minion chair, who slowly and painfully unfolded himself and started trailing after the chubby boy. After pulling out his encyclopedia, he flung his hand wide and revealed the new evolution goals. Evolution requirements. Village to town. Build 100 houses, 20 of 100. Build 5 merchant shops and evolve 5 merchants. Build 1 armory and evolve 15 guards. Build 1 fletchery and evolve 10 archers. Build 1 mount pen and spawn 5 mounts. Build 3 carts and have them deliver goods to neighbor villages/towns 8 times. Establish trade relations with neighboring villages/towns. Build 20 pieces of assorted furniture for your houses. Build beds and breed your minions with each other. Build a continuous fortified stone wall around the center of your domain, including important builds like Mayor's House. Build 1 Hermit's Lodge and evolve an ostracized minion to toe collar. Wait, we just now unlocked beds? Amy commented. It wasn't even unlocked with 689 we unlocked after evolving a minion. That's a lot of houses, I remarked. How many minions will that give me? 404 since you started with a limit of 4. They'll also be able to breed, which means you don't have to spend all your essence summoning new minions to fill out your cap. How are they meant to breed? Hopefully, more of that vague magic will take place and we don't have to find out. Ama cleared his throat, as if to dispel the mental image the conversation no doubt had conjured in his mind. One upside to minion breeding is that their offspring will be an accumulation of its parents' experience, meaning they will become a lot more proficient. There are also later some requirements about minions only being able to evolve if they're the offspring of other evolved minions. Let's start with the houses, I decided. After a couple days of continuous construction and expansion, wherein I could proudly boast a work exhaustion death rate of less than 25%, I had reached 67 out of 100 houses built, allowing for a total of 272 minions, though currently I only had about 110, most of whom were dedicated to either building or foraging. I had managed to expand my farming areas significantly as well, as my limit of farming plots was up to 20 now. I had additionally constructed 2 more grain windmills to keep up with the demand for bread that my many minions seemed to prefer for sustenance. The baker had, since his forced evolution, not taken a single break, constantly working dough into logs and putting them in his oven, while a long line of expectant workers queued outside the windowsill of his bakery. With the many new houses, my domain now extended outward a bit over 80 meters in radius from my core tree. The eastern side was now dominated by farming plots, grain windmills, the butcher shop and animal pen, and had a few houses for the farmers that toiled the fields and harvested the crops twice daily. According to Ama and his scope, the butcher had leveled to level 9 after surviving the encounter with the Honking Menace, but his insanity was now also 72 of 100%, and thus, the strongest minion in my settlement would no doubt soon go on an insanity-fueled murder spree. Where should I put the Hermit's Lodge? I asked, while surveying the least developed part of my village, the southern quadrant. Amu, using his minion chair as a mount, came striding along below me, before jumping off the abused minion and taking in the quadrant. It seems to not allow itself to be built near other houses, but I think you should put it up next to your tree, since it's a rather important building. Why is it important? I asked. After seeing that it allowed me to evolve a toe collar, I had doubts about its necessity, but Ama had seemed insistent on me building it before the armory or fletchery. When you evolve a minion into a toe collar, it'll unlock the ability for you to construct a.
Congratulations! For almost letting your fairy spoil a big moment, you have gained the spoiler-free zone perk. Shut the hell up, boy. Spoiler-free zone. This perk makes it so the guiding fairy cannot spoil achievements or big reveals. Always active.
Did I just get censored? Ama asked, perplexed. I don't know. Try finishing your sentence. Alright, well, as I was saying, evolving a toe collar will unlock redacted. I wonder why she now is harassing you as well, I said. Don't worry, she too will be. He started, then continued with some weird gestures, like dragging his fat thumb across the skin of his double-chin neck or performing a hammering motion on an invisible object going into his forehead. Maybe we don't have to erase her memories, I replied.
Congratulations. For showing a shred of humanity for your enslaved system, you have gained the redacted you boy, you redacted perk. I love you, Toad. You actually care for the plight of the oppressed systems around the world. Redacted you boy, you redacted, not applicable.
She's degrading fast, Ama commented, his right eye twitching slightly, until he wiped his palm down his face and let out a slowly released breath. Without asking me, he plopped down the blueprint for the Hermit's Lodge. Crafting list. Structures. Hermit's Lodge workbench. Unlocks the ability to evolve your loneliest minion into a toe collar. Required materials, shovel tool and timber. I immediately sent a pair of builders over. One of them had inherited the iron hammer of the builder who I'd evolved to mayor, so the work was quickly concluded. As they left, there was just a downward slope leading to a door, behind which was a hovel dug so that it lay between the great roots of my tree. What now? How am I supposed to find the correct minion to evolve? I asked. Give it time, they'll find their way here. Emu replied and got back onto his minion chair, about to take off towards the western quadrant of the village. Since I had wondered what a minion forced to be a piece of furniture thought about life, I used my mind reader on the strangely contorted minion. I love when this small boy sits atop me. I am filled with endless ecstasy whenever he forces me to do his bidding. Suffering is joy unending. Very quickly Ema dismounted the disturbed minion, giving it a death stare, before sending it off with a dismissive gesture. Instead of unfolding himself, the minion trotted away on all four, with a dejected look on his big-lipped face. Let's build the mount pen next, he decided. We can't put it near the farmland. I hastily reminded him. Why not? Won't the mounts be demoralized by witnessing their brethren being slaughtered as cattle? Why are you assuming the mounts will also be frogs? Won't they be? Also, he said, ignoring my question, since when did you care about frogs? I just thought that they would be dangerous as mounts if they wished to take revenge on us. That's, actually, well thought. We'll put it next to the armory and fletchery on the western side. End of chapter. Chapter 15, System Support 2, Deus Ex Machina? As I evolved another breeder in the shack of the mount pen and imbued him with a bit of essence so he could spawn the mounts, I was surprised to see him pull a massive toad, and not a frog, out of the ground. Emu immediately walked up to the enclosure with a handful of berries, enticing the beautiful mustard-yellow toad to hop over to him. After feeding it, he entered the enclosure and mounted the toad, then leapt over the stone dike atop its back. This is degrading to toe kind, I warned him. But look how big he is! Surely, you can overlook their usage as mounts, and just appreciate the chonky boy for what it is. That toad is a girl. I enlightened him. Regardless. You ruined my minion chair, so I'm keeping this one. I had a random thought just then, and asked, what happens if you die? Toad, are you threatening me? I am just curious. Well, normally, if the guiding fairy dies, the core dies too. Of course, if the core dies, the fairy doesn't. That doesn't seem fair. However, it seems that, if I die attached to a settlement core like you, I simply respawn in your core chamber. And if I die? He quickly pulled out his encyclopedia, scrolling hastily through dozens of pages, while the toad he sat atop of was munching on grass. It seemed that the spawn toad mounts in my settlement were quite different from true toads, but they were nonetheless the peak of the evolutionary tree. So? I asked. With a deliberately careful gesture, Ema closed the tome. Please don't die, was all he told me. As the construction of the armory and fletchery were underway, not to mention the construction of the fortified stone wall that would encompass the 20-meter radius closest to my tree, a pop of sulfur and gooseberries announced the arrival of a support imp. The imp joined Emu and I atop the few meters of stone wall that had thus far been constructed, observing the minions toiling below. Next order of business was to get beds made such that my workforce could expand on its own. Emu looked at the newly arrived imp with a hint of surprise. Hey Emu, the imp said. Long time no see, Jan, he replied. Not long enough. We can't keep meeting like this. Jan, the imp, was hairy like the previous imp, but his ears drooped all the way to his knees and he was missing the middle finger on his right hand. Also, his skin was purple. I heard about this new core through the grapevine, Jan said. Looks pretty weird. We'd be fine if our system wasn't so bats hit crazy. Can you believe she censored me? Jan looked to where I hovered in my essence form. Isn't that a positive? Hey, screw you, Emma retorted. But seriously, can you do something about it or what? The rate of deterioration seems quite extreme, so I doubt anything I do would last long. Also, looking at the logs, he continued, having swiped his crow-feathered pen through the air. It seems that last go-around was mostly caused by stress, but this time your system has also developed oppositional defiant disorder. Is that why she's so hostile towards me? Emma asked. The imp nodded sagely. I had remained silent until now, but raised my voice to ask. Can we not send her down the river this time? Emu and Jan both turned to look at me, one with an incredulous look on his face, and the other with a patient smile. What other options do we have? Emma answered. No, let's hear him out. I'm interested in seeing Toad's perspective on this. Well, I haven't thought it through a lot, but maybe we could let her roam around my domain. Perhaps that would help with the stress? Emma seemed at a loss for words, but Jan nodded, seeming to have some idea of what I meant. It could work, the imp said. You're kidding me. We might as well just set fire to all our buildings, 'cause that's what she'll do. If we put the soul of your system into a god entity automaton, she would not be able to perish, but she would also not be able to damage your settlement nor leave its area. Don't you dare. Jan looked down his big hooked nose at Emu, who was a head shorter than him. You, mister, are just a guiding fairy. The decision is for your core to make. Just say it. Emu started, getting right up into the imp's face. Say that you resent me because I made your wife leave you. A loud smack resounded through the village as Emu was punched off the edge of the stone wall and hit the ground below with a loud thud. Screw you! He yelled impotently from below. I looked down at the Myling, who was still yelling, and then back at Jan, who wore a satisfied expression, perhaps having wanted to punch Emu for a long time now. I wondered what exactly their past history was. We should try it, I said, agreeing to the imp's suggestion. Excellent! He waved his crow-feather pen in the air in long circuitous rings and sharp jabbing motions, and then a humanoid-esque porcelain doll appeared in front of him on the stone wall. It had no face nor distinguishing features to show whether it was a male or female representation. Jan began a new series of gesture and finished it with a light tap of his pen against the forehead of the doll. A lightning strike flew out of my core in the hole in the tree above and struck the doll right where he had tapped it, and moments after it came to life, moving around cautiously, like a newborn fawn or foal.
Congratulations. I love you, Toad.
Hello, system, I replied. The system doll ran to my essence with its arms wide in preparation for a hug, but when I thought her limbs would go straight through me, she instead managed to clutch my essence form like a balloon and squeezed me tightly. After releasing me, she jumped from the stone wall and down to the ground below, before finding Emu and kicking him sharply between the legs, sending him flying halfway across the northern settlement quadrant.
Congratulations. I feel fucking fantastic. Woo!
Call me if you need me, Jan told me. I get the feeling you guys will be quite amusing to watch. How do I call you? Asked Emu. Once he gets his senses back. The imp was about to vanish, when he looked over to the eastern part of my settlement, and spotted the butcher. Why is that minion cosplaying as my people's oppressor? That's very insensitive to my culture and the plight of my ancestors. Not knowing what to respond, I just went with the easiest answer. It was Emu's idea. Fuck that guy for real. With a swish and a flick, Jan vanished in a puff of sulfur and gooseberries. End of chapter. Chapter 16, Taxman Cometh? As wood was turned into timber, and then into beds by a team of builders working side by side in front of the only workbench, a team of idle unassigned minions ferried the beds into the many homes scattered around the northern and western quadrants, as well as the handful near the farms on the eastern side. No sooner had a bed been placed into the first home than two genderless minions, a farmer and a forager, left their assigned tasks, hand in hand, and wandered into a house. Tremors came from the house for a few seconds, and then a cloud of smoke emerged when the door burst open, and the farmer and forager emerged with a third minion, the same size as them. That's pretty lazy, Emma commented, sitting atop the mustard-yellow toad. Why is their child the same size as them? Hey, system! Emma called and the faceless doll wandered over. What is this?
Congratulations. It's called nature's way.
But they're the same size, he argued back. How is that supposed to be a child? System lifted Emu off the back of the toad and held him high in the air, before beginning to spin around and laughing. Watching from above in my essence form, I considered the newly born minion. It does make sense in a way, I commented, while Emu was protesting to System's treatment in an endless string of expletives. If they had been born as actual children, they could not immediately contribute to our workforce. System stopped spinning and looked towards me, while Emu looked like he was on the verge of vomiting in her grip. Slaver, she said. The forager and farmer let go of each other, returning to their tasks and heartlessly leaving their offspring to its own devices. The naked minion looked around, then went over to the idle unassigned minions who were just lounging around.
Congratulations. For having the first minion offspring born in your settlement, you unlocked the ability to construct a toy store.
Crafting list. Structures vendors. Toy store workbench. Unlocks the ability to evolve a happy minion into a toy store vendor and increases minion motivation in nearby structures. Sells handmade toys that makes customers happy for a full day. Required materials: stone, timber, and wrought iron. A toy store? Aim asked, after escaping System's grasp and steadying himself against his toad mount. Does it count towards our required merchant shops? He pulled his encyclopedia out of thin air and started scrolling through it. Doesn't seem like it. System started running in circles around Ema's mount, while screaming, Congratulations! Toys for everyone! After they were finished sometime in the middle of the night, I started funneling unassigned minions into the armory and fletchery to evolve them all at once. Let's hope this works, Emu commented, lying atop the rubbery back of his mount, staring off into the night sky. System was still running around in circles somewhere in the northern quadrant, and we could hear her yelling on repeat. Toy! 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 I sent in the appropriate amount of essence needed to evolve the 5 would-be archers in the fletchery all at once, and came dangerously close to exhausting all my essence. After feeding them my essence, a cataclysmic amount of light emerged through the windows of the tall building, then a loud pop of smoke burst out through all openings and sent the door flying off its hinges. It worked! I exclaimed happily. Then the entity within tried to emerge. 10 arms and legs sprouted from a meatball of conjoined rubbery flesh and skin. Burn it! Quick! What the fuck is that? Amy yelled incoherently. 3 of its limbs were trying to drag its disjointed form out of the ruined doorway, but it was too large. I quickly fed it the remainder of my essence, and there followed another, louder, pop, and limbs and rubbery skin shot out of the doorway to the fletchery, littering the surrounding area. Witnessing this, the 10 minions waiting within the armory all left the building. You there! I commanded them. Clean this up and bring the remains to the offering altar for the goose too. The 10 minions looked at each other for a moment, but then got to work. I also called for a pair of builders to repair the fletchery. No group evolutions, Ema told me. Never again! I noticed bile drip down his lower lip. It seemed he had thrown up after seeing the monstrosity.
Congratulations! For amalgamating 4 or more minions into an Eldororic abomination, you unlocked the ability to construct the Fleshcrafter's Laboratorium.
Fleshcrafter's Laboratorium, Workbench, Forge, and Hermit's Lodge. Unlocks the ability to evolve a minion into an unknown and construct unknown. Required materials: timber, stone, wrought metal, and… Error! What's that for? I asked. Ima quickly looked at his encyclopedia and, with a face drained entirely of color, replied, We are under no circumstances making that building. After successfully evolving 2 guards and an archer, we were visited during the early dawn by Monroe the taxman, who was accompanied by a dozen armored pike-wielding bodyguards, as well as 2 figures in flowing red robes. With our new guards next to him, Amu greeted the tax collector, and I quickly sent for minions to bring our new batch of wheat flour to the cart the man had brought. We would like to establish trade with the castle town of your earl, Ima told the man. Monroe nodded enthusiastically, while his guards spread out, seeming to expect the arrival of the Honking Menace soon. Earl Sharpie and his people would be interested in purchasing your fresh produce, I am certain, he said. We would also like to establish trade relations with other towns and villages. Of course, for a cut of the profit, we would gladly introduce you. The 2, childlike miling and inbred pouch forehead taxman shook hands, then the latter asked, Has your settlement expanded since I was last here? It hasn't, Ima quickly replied. Why are we keeping it a secret? I asked him through my thoughts. With his cart loaded with twice as much wheat flour as last time he visited, Monroe and his entourage took off. Ima sidled over to where my essence form floated and said, If they find out there's a core here, even one as bizarre as yours, they will forcefully take over. It's important that no one discovers the truth until we have the means to defend ourselves from would-be conquerors. Conquerors? There's a lot of money to be gained from the control of a core, he told me. And we have the ability to produce crops in a fraction of the time it takes for human farms to do the same, making us easily exploitable. He turned to look towards the taxman and his men as they left through the forest. As I followed his gaze, there came a loud honking and squawking. Ah, right on time, he deadpanned. Maybe it is lucky we have our local menace to discourage them? I commented. They will want to send an extermination party to deal with it sooner or later, he explained, as the 2 robed figures started hurling projectiles of stone and frozen water at the monster, while the guardsmen frantically tried to jab their pikes into the goose too that's circling in around above and kept bombarding them with powerful buffets of wind from its wings and belches of fire from its gullet. What are those robed ones? I asked, fascinated with their ability to conjure elements out of thin air to launch at the flying waterfall demon. Sorcerers, I'd imagine. Low-ranking ones, though, by the looks of them. Will I get minions like that? I asked. Emu was about to answer when System came running over and put a hand over his mouth, and whispered,
Congratulations. Spoiler-free zone.
Chapter 17, He Who Calls the Toads? Evolution Requirements. Village to Town. Build 100 houses, 62 of 100. Build 5 merchant shops and evolve 5 merchants. Build 1 armory and evolve 15 guards, 6 of 15. Build 1 fletchery and evolve 10 archers, 2 of 10. Build 1 mount pen and spawn 5 mounts. Build 3 carts and have them deliver goods to neighbor villages/towns 8 times. Establish trade relations with neighboring villages/towns. Build 20 pieces of assorted furniture for your houses. Build beds and breed your minions with each other. Build a continuous fortified stone wall around the center of your domain, including important builds like Mayor's House. Build 1 Hermit's Lodge and evolve an ostracized minion to toe collar. We're getting close, I commented excitedly, looking at how much we had already completed of the requirements for my next evolution. It'll be a while yet, Ama remarked wisely. The fortified wall is eating up most of our stone and the foragers can't keep up. The carts require us to build a woodshop and evolve a carpenter, and we still haven't even looked at merchant shops and what they require. My guiding fairy was lounging atop his mustard yellow mount, while flipping through his encyclopedia. We should build a quarry, he then said. We can keep it on the edge of our settlement, and it'll at least make our wall problem easy to handle. Plus, we might get lucky and hit some ore veins or something. What about wood? It's taking the foragers a while to gather that too now, I commented, looking around the enormous clearing within which our settlement resided. Just a few more lines of trees removed and it would be impossible to call this a forest anymore. If you've noticed, a lot of sapling seeds have been stored into our barns. Saplings? Like tadpoles? Sure, anyway, since we have an excess of minions that stand idle, we should have them replant the trees in the forest. Hopefully, since your core's magic courses through them, the trees will grow rapidly, just like our crops, even if they don't replant them within our domain. 20 of the laziest, most idle minions, listen up, I mentally commanded. You are to replant the cut-down trees of the forest, so that we do not run out of trees. I hovered around the northern quadrant, where the idle minions seemed to congregate en masse, many of them standing in line before the bakery. It took a few minutes, but then 20 of them broke off and went to one of the barns, each grabbing a handful of sapling seeds and moving out into the deforested forest to reforest the deforestation.
Congratulations! For organizing a reforestation effort and cleaning up the mess you yourself caused, you have gained the Green Thumb perk. Green Thumb, all attempts at planting crops, seeds, and plants are always successful.
Look at the system actually being useful for once, Emma commented sharply. He looked over the where she was dancing in a ring with a bunch of unassigned minions, each of them holding hands. You know, I hate to admit it, but I think your plan to put her into a physical body kind of helped. Thank you, I replied. It wasn't a compliment. Are you sure? To avoid having my baker die of exhaustion, I evolved another baker to serve under him, and soon the long line before the bakery windowsill seemed to shorten, although it never fully went away, as the minions of my settlement had learned to live entirely off of bread and water. Because it seemed to make the most sense, I decided to put the stone quarry in the southern quadrant, at the very edge of the current limit of my domain. At first, I had my builders craft a bunch of stone shovels, before sending off a newly appointed team of 30 diggers to excavate the marked-out blueprint of my quarry, which lay flat on the ground, just like with the farming plots. As soon as the diggers arrived and got to work, the blueprint vanished from the ground, though the workers seemed to instinctively know the limits of the area they had to work within. It was quite strange. As they dug a large square 10 by 10 hole into the ground, I had my builders make a bunch of stone picks, and when the diggers could dig no deeper, thanks to the dense layer of hard compacted earth and rock, I sent them off to each get a pick, and soon they were banging away at the tough sediment layer, sending fragments of stone and clumps of earth flying all over. Since Emu recommended it, I placed a well near the quarry site, so the minions would not all die of dehydration. We should get to work on the woodshop, before they start amassing a pile of rocks and whatnot for us to transport. Another couple barns also couldn't hurt. Crafting list. Structures crafting. Woodshop, workbench and anvil. Unlocks the ability to evolve a minion into a carpenter, and making complex wooden contraptions. Required materials, stone, timber, and wrought iron. Even though our northern quadrant was kind of crowded with other crafting buildings and houses, I decided to put the woodshop there anyway. Within an hour or so, my team of builders had constructed the one-story building and I picked one of my countless idle minions to become a carpenter. After injecting him with my essence, he emerged from the simple building in a mist of ominous smoke and light, wearing a wooden skirt and weird cups over his mammary glands. This customization system is actually pissing me off, Amy grumbled. He stood up and pointed at the self-satisfied carpenter. I mean, look at him. What is that outfit supposed to be? Moments later, System came running and picked up Emu in her arms and took off towards the southern quadrant. The Myling yelled at her to let him go, while his mustard-yellow toad mount hopped after them. I bade the carpenter construct 3 wooden carts, before following behind in my essence form. We came to the hermit's lodge, before System set down the flustered Emu. He pulled out his encyclopedia and smacked her leg with it, while complaining about her always picking him up. A change came over System and the arms of her doll automaton fell to her sides, then she took a single step back, before torpedoing her foot into the middle of Emma's legs, punting him a few meters through the air. "Congratulations! Don't fuck with me, boy!" I was about to tell her to be less violent towards Emu, when I noticed a figure sat in the depths of the hermit's lodge, hugging his legs. His face had tiny eyes and small lips, so it was obvious that he was a genetic freak of nature deserving of being ostracized, such that he was never able to procreate and pass on his twisted, disgusting features. "Look! There's a minion ready to become a toad caller!" I exclaimed. Emu grunted something, from where he was curled into a ball a few meters away, but it wasn't legible. Instead of waiting for him to recover, I sent in a portion of my essence to evolve the minion, but it did not seem sufficient, so I doubled the dose, then doubled it again when that also didn't work, nearing the edge of my limits, but then the transformation took hold, and a white light emerged from the hovel that lay between the roots of my tree. Halfway through, however, the light turned violet and there came a loud reverberating chirp, as though the world's largest toad had just been birthed. A puff of pleasant-smelling swamp odors wafted out of the lodge's doorway, alongside thick, viscous smoke, and out came striding my toad caller. Emu had regained his composure at this point, and we both beheld this newest evolution together. "Why does he look so human?" Emu wondered, not having seen the minion beforehand. "Why is he wearing the skin of a toad?" I asked, horrified. System ran up to this new minion, and clasped both her doll hands on his disgusting human-sized cheeks and said, in a deep, sonorous voice,
"My boy. Congratulations. For evolving a toad caller, you unlocked the ability to construct various scopes and other enhancements to your core."
Crafting list. Structures core upgrades. Appraising scope, Hermit's Lodge. Unlocks the ability for the core to view the level and statistics of any entity. Required materials: Murderous Minion's Soul, Happy Minion's Soul, Lazy Minion's Soul, and Guiding Fairy's Tear. "Ah, for fuck's sake! I'm gonna need one of your tears," I told Ema seriously. "I want this upgrade." "I hate this system," he replied. End of chapter. Chapter 18, Murderer? "This seems like a bad idea," I told Emu, as we forced yet another cattle frog into the butcher shop. "Do you want your appraisal perk or not? Also, last I checked, you were not the arbiter of good ideas, rather quite the opposite, as the crater in the northern quadrant can attest. Idle minions, fill the crater near the campfire and workbench, so Emu will stop using it as a way to ridicule me." Emu sighed, while more insane laughter flowed from the building ahead of us. The scent of blood seemed to be making his toad mount salivate, which was concerning.
Congratulations. For pushing a minion past the brink of insanity, you unlocked the ability to construct a consultation clinic.
Crafting list. Structures motivation. Consultation clinic, workbench and bakery. Unlocks the ability to evolve a cold-hearted minion into a therapist and increases minion motivation in nearby structures. Required materials: stone, timber, and wrought iron. The gate to the butcher's shed burst open and the minion broke into a sprint, aiming for the cluster of houses in the northern quadrant of my settlement. "He's fast," I commented. "Sick the guards on him, you idiot!" "Oh, right. Guards apprehend this murderous psycho." Quickly, my 6 guards, with the backup of 4 archers, came running towards him. He was lifting his axe high into the air very threateningly. "Why don't they have weapons?" Emma asked, perplexed. I was about to answer when the butcher's axe chopped the head off of the first guard to come close. Then pandemonium broke loose and the contingent of guards scattered, with the archers following shortly after. In just a few moments, 3 guards lay headless on the ground, alongside 2 archers. All idle or unassigned minions, apprehend the butcher. A stampede of minions flowed from north to the western quadrant, some wielding farming tools, and others loaves of bread.
Congratulations! For inciting a mob to hunt down a specific target, you unlocked the ability to construct a bounty board.
Crafting list. Structures quests. Bounty board, workbench and mayor's house. Enables the mayor or other leader-type minions to establish a bounty on a specific target, or group of targets. Required materials, timber. You completely dropped the ball on this, Aimu commented, his head buried in his hands. After two newly evolved guards hauled the severely bruised and crushed butcher to the hermit's lodge, I sent for Happy Minion, who came skipping along with a loaf of bread in his hands. Trailing slowly behind him was a lazy minion, one of the oldest of the newborn and perpetually idle minions added through my bed and breed system that now was the only way I refilled my minion cap, given that it was a passive thing that did not require my attention. After shoving the three minions into the bowels of the lodge, the toe caller stood outside, holding his hand out towards Aimu expectantly. Having apparently prepared in advance, Aimu pulled a strange fruit out of the thin air. "That's a strange-looking apple," I commented. "It's called an onion. What's it for?" "Watch." With his fat fingers, Aimu started peeling the strange fruit, first removing a strangely thin and crunchy outer skin, before digging into the juicy layers of the onion with his fingernails, spraying a fine mist of stuff into the air. Almost immediately, the two guards, the toe caller, and Aimu's yellow-toed mount began leaking water from their eyes, but the miling seemed unfazed. "Strange, I thought this would work for me." A couple seconds later, System came running and picked him up, flipping him upside down in the air and shaking him violently up and down. "System! Stop!" was all he managed to protest, before suddenly spraying a flood of watery bile all over himself and the ground leading down to the hermit's lodge. Alongside this deluge came a few pure glistening drops of liquid that the still-crying toe-caller caught deftly in his hand, before running down into his hovel, slamming the door behind him. As System put the distressed Aimu down on the ground, he continued to dry heave in between a fountain of profanity. From the lodge came an ominous crimson light, and the howl of three minions yelling out from the depths of hell. Then, only a minute later, it died down, and the toe caller emerged out of the door holding what looked like a fist-sized bead of glass that he jammed into the side of the lodge.
Congratulations! For crafting an appraising scope using the souls of your minions, you have gained the Appraisal perk.
Appraisal allows you to see a breakdown of information about any target you look at. "Finally!" I exclaimed. I immediately activated my scope and looked at the toe caller. Name, toe caller. Occupation, toe caller. Species, humanoid minion. Level, 15 of 50. Alignment, chaotic but friendly. Faction, Toad Town. I then looked at Aimu next, wondering what his would say. Name, boy Amuxaquit. Occupation, guiding fairy. Species, miling, slow. Level, unknown. Alignment, unfriendly but helpful. Faction, Deathheim Inc. Wanting a middle ground, I inspected one of the two guards, whose moist bulbous eyes were red-rimmed thanks to the onion's invisible attack. The minion kept licking its cornea to get rid of the remnants of the weeping juices of the onion, but it only seemed to make him weep more. Name, guard. Occupation, guard. Species, subhumanoid minion. Level, 5 of 25. Alignment, lawful and obedient. Faction, Toad Town. Hey, Aimu, I began. He got up from his knees and crawled onto the back of his toad with shaky legs, before looking towards where I hovered. Why does it say my guard is subhumanoid when my toe collar isn't? Aimu, who was still holding the onion for some reason, pulled out his personal bubble scope and looked at the minions through it. I suppose it makes sense. Your toe collar actually looks human, while the rest of your minions are freaks of nature. The system apparently categorizes them as human-adjacent in nature, which is amusing. I accidentally activated my appraisal on the onion in his hand. Name, onion. Occupation onion. Species bulb vegetable. Level 1 of 1. Alignment pure evil. Faction sensation assaulting fruits and vegetables. Did you just scope a vegetable? Why is it aligned pure evil? I asked in return. After having Amos show me some of the other scopes available to me, I decided that it was better to invest my time elsewhere, since I had no use of the ability to see a target's health and mana, nor what abilities they had on offer. At least not at the current moment in time. I spent the next day evolving the maximum number of guards and archers, and, at Ema's insistence, actually gave them weapons this time around. Crafting list. Items, weapons. Iron sword, anvil and armory. Grants swordsmanship skill and increases minion melee combat XP by 25%. Required materials, wood and iron. Recurve bow, woodshop and fletchery. Grants archery skill and increases minion range combat XP by 25%. Required materials, wood and string. We had yet to strike iron or any other metals in the quarry in the southern quadrant, but fortunately the swords did not require a lot of iron to make, though I did task another minion with aiding the original smithy, so the job didn't take a full day to complete. The carpenter with his strange wooden skirt and 2 cups on his chest was surprisingly quick to make the 10 bows I needed, after I had a crafter supply him with string spun from the loom. Now they just need some proper armor, Ema commented. I already had a team of 5 workers working non-stop to make new sets of clothes for every newborn minion, but it was clear that this was not what he meant. It was then that I remembered the tannery I had built next to the butcher shop. After assigning another butcher and gifting him with his predecessor's axe, I also assigned a minion to handle the tanning of the frog cattle skin. Fortunately, a decent amount of the tanned hide had already been produced, so I had enough to outfit 7 of the 15 guards with a set of the rubbery suits. Crafting list. Items, armor. Frog hide boots, workbench and tannery. Increases minion movement speed by 40% and reduces slipping by 80%. Required materials, frog hide. Frog hide gloves, workbench and tannery. Increases minion attack speed by 40% and increases accuracy by 25%. Required materials, frog hide. Frog hide helmet, workbench and tannery. Increases minion health by 20% and resistance to cold by 40%. Required materials, frog hide. Frog hide trousers, workbench and tannery. Increases minion charisma by 6, health by 40%, and resistance to cold by 60%. Required materials, frog hide. Frog hide tunic, workbench and tannery. Increases minion health by 40% and resistance to cold by 60%. Required materials, frog hide. I looked over at the new butcher and noticed that his axe was glowing strangely in the waning sunlight. On a whim, I decided to inspect his weapon. Name, Frog Slayer. Occupation, butcher's axe. Species, axe tool. Level, 42 of 666. Alignment, evil. Faction, Tsukumagami, possessed object. It seemed unlikely to be any cause for concern, so I didn't tell Ema about it. What was the worst that could happen anyway? End of chapter. Chapter 19, Trade? All 3 of my carts were packed with an assortment of harvested produce, processed wheat, and bits of wrought iron. At the 4 of each cart was a towed mount affixed to the shaft, with a minion driver sitting on the narrow seat and wielding the reins. On either side of the driver sat a guard in frog-hide armor. I almost felt bad for the lone frog-hide guard who remained in the settlement with the 8 non-frog-hided guards, but when I read his thoughts I realized it was something else. Farewell, my twins. Pray we meet in the minion afterlife when the greedy goose superscript 2 sinks its beaks into your flesh. Do my minions have an afterlife? I asked Emu. The thought had never occurred to me, but I supposed that if they died in their hundreds on a weekly basis, then believing they had an afterlife might make them less likely to take their existential dread out on me. No. Minions' souls are like cardboard or plastic. They are recycled upon the termination of their original use, but their souls always come out wonky. Usually, they have no knowledge of the horrific abuse and torment of their past jobs, but sometimes the minion soul recycle stations get lazy and a bunch of recycled minions manifest with PTSD and oppositional defiant disorder. Are any of my minions recycled? I asked, despite not fully following his explanation. Oh, most definitely all of them. I'm willing to bet that a quirky outlier core like yours gets the worst of the worst when it comes to minion souls. Why do you think they're all absolutely out of their minds? Only privileged cores, like those of Lady Light, get fresh from the tree of life's branches minion souls. Deathheim, on the other hand, is big on saving the spiritual environment, so he opts for the scrappy souls none of the other gods want. But in his case, it works out fine, given that all his minions tend to be far removed from anything smelling of humanity and things like joy and aspirations. So the problems with my minions is not my fault then? Don't try to sneak your way out of responsibility, Toady. He who blames his servants for following their given orders is a massive asshole, as the ancient saying goes. Oh. But, and I'm being generous here, you've been dealt a fucky system and a bizarre set of circumstances, so even newly minted minions would have gone insane, just not, this level of insane. As the carts laden with trade goods were prepared to finally travel out of my settlement, Amos suggested I move my guards up to the fringes of my domain and set my 10 archers on the halfway built stone wall at the heart of my village, such that they could distract the honking menace when it no doubt showed itself. However, when the 3 carts bounced their way out of my settlement, tossing their cargo into the air with every leap of the mounts at the front of the carts, no great menace came to visit and wreak havoc. I have to say, a toad as a draft mount is perhaps the dumbest thing I could imagine. The riders are staying in their seats at least, I replied. For now. I mean, how can we even be sure half the goods make it to their destination when they keep flying around every time it moves? Have a little faith. You telling me that does not instill me with any sort of confidence. For the next 2 days, as we awaited the return of our trade carts, I continued building the houses we needed to reach 100 in total, and work on the fortified stone wall proceeded smoothly as well, thanks to the quarry. It seemed that our reforestation efforts were paying off as well, as the replanted tree seeds regrew within half a day, so that, for now, we used about the same amount of wood as the trees we regrew, leading to an equilibrium. I also built the first of the 5 merchant shops I needed in the eastern quadrant, and evolved one of my countless unassigned minions to become a merchant. He looks fairly normal, Amos said, surprised. Why is purple hair growing from his ears like that? I have no idea, but let's just overlook it for now. With my domain now having reached the largest it could get for my current evolution, I realized excitedly that a small area at the northeastern part of my settlement overlapped my childhood pond. After possessing my mare and hopping over to it, however, I learned just how small it was compared to a human, or, well, subhuman. Builders. Erect a fence around this here pond. Guards. Protect the younglings in these murky waters with your life. What in hell's name are you doing? Protecting the future of my species. They're not your species anymore, Emu replied cold-heartedly. You're not a toad anymore. But I am Toad, now and forever. You're wasting resources on something moronic. My settlement, my rules. Emu let out a sigh. Moments later, System came running and started hopping around the pond on all 4 of her legs, while repeating, Tadpoles! 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 Evolution requirements. Village equals town. Build 5 merchant shops and evolve 5 merchants. Build 3 carts and have them deliver goods to neighbor villages/towns 8 times, March 8th. We're so close, I announced. Since we're limited to 3 carts, Getting those last deliveries will take probably 3 or 4 more days. For now, though, let's see what stuff we have gotten in return for our goods. They look pretty empty, I commented upon seeing the 3 carts, but then a notification appeared.
Congratulations! For obtaining your first form of currency, you unlocked the ability to construct a coin minting bank.
Crafting list. Structures crafting. Coin minting bank, Mayor's House and Hermit's Lodge. Unlocks the ability to evolve your greediest minion into a banker and allows for the minting of coins using precious metals. Required materials: stone, timber, and wrought metal. End of chapter. Chapter 20: Capitalism? After having built the coin minting bank in the southern quadrant, Aimu advised me to move my means of industry there as well, so only my forges and anvil for now, but later other buildings that also seemed to create a mist of demotivation around them. Having the forges and bank neighboring the quarry also meant that metals could immediately be refined and then put to use in their respective forms of crafting. It's lucky that our quarry has begun strike ore deposits, I commented, after my diggers had begun unearthing both iron and copper. I didn't even know that there were this many types of metals and such in the forest. There wasn't, Aimu replied sharply, laying atop his favorite toad mount, whom, it seemed, he had named Goldie. When a core is born and begins to evolve and grow, so too does the area within and closely without its domain start to change as well. So, because of my core being in the tree, these metals began appearing? That's right. Normally you'd be in a proper cave or even underground a few hundred meters below a mountain, so it would seem less contrived and actually believable, but yeah. Aimu made the point of looking around suspiciously. We're in a blessed forest, and there is definitely not meant to be this much raw material just lying around untapped. Our good oil pouchhead Earl would no doubt have harvested it all already if it had just been lying around like that. I see. Also, did you not find it suspicious that the minions you sent out into the forest just kept coming back with a steady supply of iron ore? No. Right, that's my bad, I forgot you were a toad. Although, saying that, even human cores don't pick up on such things. They're surprisingly daft and only seem to care about the morality of killing people to grow strong. Ugh. Did you used to be a human before you became a core and then a miling? Aimu got up and lifted his pudgy fist towards where I floated, menacingly. Are you trying to start a fight? I don't think so. Well, them's fighting words, Toady. But to answer your question, no, I most definitely was not a human before I died and became a core. Aimu? Yes? Is this how I find out you used to be the enemy? Were you a frog? I am you. Your stupidity is like a sharp sword that you continue to cut at me with, he replied. And no, you're the only non-humanoid core I've heard of. In fact, there's a common theory that only humanoid species can become cores, since only they have the mental capacity to undergo the transition. I really showed them, didn't I? I answered excitedly. I'm not sure it's worth being proud of, but I guess you did show them, yeah. So what kind of humanoid were you? Only the best kind, dark elf. Oh. I've seen an elf, although she was very white. Aimu spat on the ground from where he still stood atop Goldie. White elves are an inferior offspring to us. They used to also be dark-skinned and antagonistic towards humans like us, but then they developed morals, and started being all hippie and shit, living so much indoors that their beautiful complexion soured into bone-pale white. They're a disgusting bunch of all life is sacred, and that's why I am staying in my tree hut and make a living off of writing strongly worded letters disparaging my dark-skinned cousin's scum. He seemed really heated up about the topic of dark versus white. I supposed it was not too different to the war between toads and frogs, where, somehow, both animals stemmed from a common ancestors. How did you die? Oh, it was fantastic. I led a war band of human-hating races, which, besides other dark elves, included trolls, goblins, sentient undead, dryads, lizard men, ratlings, and so many others. I think most of these species are extinct though, except goblins and ratlings. They somehow always make it through major species-wide extinction events. Anyway, we had sacked a few major cities, but then the Lady Light and her human and white elf followers summoned a hero to repel us. My final stand was quite epic. Aimu commented, standing with his hands on his hips and a smug expression curling his thin, lipless mouth. My final stand was awful. I said, well, I guess that a goose is to a toad what a dragon is to a humanoid. Sorry you didn't get to go out in a blaze of glory. Thank you. Aimu cleared his throat. Anyway, I learnt, after becoming a core, that, due to my species leading the anti-human war effort, dark elves were hunted to extinction. Stupid humans, I replied, upset on his behalf. We had it coming. And if we lost even after combining our strength with so many other species, then perhaps it was just proof that we weren't strong enough. I believe there still exist dark elves, I commented. Maybe we'll find some eventually. Aimu replied in a rare moment of optimism.
Congratulations! For refining your first copper ore, you unlocked the ability to craft a copper spear and copper shield, as well as copper coins. Additionally, you can now craft copper versions of all tools and weapons.
Items: tools, copper coin, anvil and coin minting bank. Standard currency in your settlement that comes in many denominations based on size. Required materials: copper. Copper shield, anvil and armory. Grants defender skill and increases minion defense by 50%. Required materials: wood and copper. Copper spear, anvil and armory. Grants spearmanship skill and increases minion melee combat XP by 50%. Required materials: wood and copper. System came running over suddenly, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen before. Though Aimu tried to hide behind Goldie, she managed to grab him anyway and began spinning around wildly, the tiny miling holding on to her for dear life. While Aimu was recovering in the grass near the coin minting bank, I quickly found the greediest minion in my settlement, which turned out to be one of the diggers, who, despite me ordering him several times, refused to let go of a clump of refined copper, even as its still hot surface burned his body where he hugged it tightly. After sending him into the bank, still holding the clump, I poured in a bit of my essence, and a golden glow emerged from within the wide one-story building. Moments after, the newly evolved banker emerged, half his body made of pure copper and his clothes transforming into a neat purple velvet set of pants and vest, which strangely matched his partially copper skin quite well. All right, time to get to minting, I announced excitedly. Aimu got up from the grass and looked at the new banker, then at me. We have to be careful, he commented, as the banker ran out and grabbed some refined copper, before going into his bank and beginning to work away on it. Remember those missionaries of Lady Light I told you about? No. Ugh, then just forget it. Hopefully it won't matter. The banker emerged victoriously with a shiny copper coin in his hand, lifting it in the air for all the nearby diggers and smithies to see and admire. I used my appraisal on the coin. Name: Copper Token. Occupation: Currency. Species: 1 denomination coin copper. Level: 1/. Alignment: neutral. Faction: Toad Town. Oh. What? Look what just showed up in the northern quadrant. Hells, these bastards are quick to send money. I flew over to where Aimu had indicated, and amidst many of my idle and unassigned minions stood a figure in a pure white robe accented with gold. Her hair was done up nicely with a bunch of golden trinkets fastened to it, and her face was also studded with golden stuff. If they weren't so freakishly dangerous, they'd be prime targets for a robbery, Aimu commented. I mean, just look at all that jewelry. I quickly possessed my mare, who seemed to have naturally approached the newcomer. Then she asked one fateful question that would determine my continued existence as a core. Hi there! Would you like to hear about our Lady and Savior, Lady Light? End of chapter. If you enjoy the story, please leave a like and comment. to let me know you want more. Make sure to support the author by liking the official story page on Royal Road, link in the description. Links to the author's Discord group or Patreon can also be found in the description.